These developments with my next guest, Democratic Congressman Adam Schiff of California. Is the ranking member of the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence. Congressman, thanks for coming in.
You bet.
You've read those 28 pages, still classified, right?
Yes, absolutely.
What can you tell us about that without violating classified information?
I think the best description I've heard of them is they're essentially like a police report. They have a lot of allegations. They point to certainly things that look incriminating.
Incriminating against who?
Well, in the sense that there are connections that are portrayed potentially as a coincidence, that there's a certain meeting in a restaurant, that there are contacts with the embassy. That I think
by some of the hijackers.
By some of the hijackers. And you read that and you think, well, how likely is that to be a coincidence? The reality is the 9/11 Commission that then went and investigated these allegations in the Commission's work, in the Joint Inquiry's work, weren't able to essentially follow the trail to any high-ranking Saudi officials. But nonetheless, these pages, I believe, should be released. They can be redacted if there are still concerns about sources and methods, but let the American people see what's in them. Often the speculation is worse than the actual contents. And sometimes when you release a document like that, even after as many years as have gone by, it generates new information. People who read it are aware of connections that maybe the investigators weren't. So I think they should be released.
15 of the 19 hijackers were Saudis. Bin Laden, of course, was a Saudi. If you read those pages, why doesn't the administration, for all of these 15 years, they've argued that there's sensitive information in dealing with sources and methods that would undermine U.S. national security. That's why it's been kept classified.
I think it's a combination of reasons. Yes, in part, there's a need to protect sources and methods. But that can be done. You can redact the information so that those sources and methods are protected. Part of it, though, I think, is to avoid the damage to the relationship between the U.S. and Saudi Arabia.
If the U.S. were to release those 28 pages, would it damage U.S.-Saudi relations? Well,
you know, there'll certainly be a lot of speculation about what's in those 28 pages, even when they're released, and there'll be a lot of head-scratching about how is this possible, and people will certainly, many, leap to the conclusion that high-ranking Saudi officials had to somehow have been involved. But that has not been corroborated, and nonetheless, I think that the American people can be entrusted to draw their own conclusions, to get the information, to have that balanced with what the 9/11 Commission itself did thereafter. So, I don't frankly think that damaging potentially a relationship or embarrassment to that relationship is a good reason to withhold information the American people ought to know.
The 6 individuals who apparently had some contact with some of the 19 hijackers, I assume all of them got out of the United States shortly after 9/11. Is that right?
I don't know exactly what the timetable would be, but I would imagine that probably none of them are still in the country.
They were all Saudi citizens.
I believe, and I would have to go through just exactly what 6 Mr. Lehman was referring to. There were certainly several people referred to in those 28 pages that had contact with people who ended up being among the hijackers, and I would suspect that they're all out of the country. I don't know that. It will be difficult, I think, to pursue new leads this long after the fact, but nonetheless, you could have new information come to the fore. And that's a good reason for releasing.
There are lawsuits now pending in which victims' families, the 3,000 people killed, they want to sue Saudi Arabia. In part, the administration is resisting that, saying that's not appropriate. They have diplomatic immunity. Where do you stand on that?
Well, this is the much more difficult question, in my view. The release of the 28 pages ought to be easy. The question is there a way to draft this law? Because we'd all like to see the 9/11 victims be able to pursue relief and compensation from anyone responsible. Is there a way that we can draft this law that doesn't invite the U.S. to be sued around the world? You could easily foresee, for example, Iraqis who lost loved ones suing the United States for going to war based on faulty intelligence. You could see us being sued by Afghans, by Syrians, and others. So obviously we have an interest in protecting our service members as well as our country from those kind of suits. And the question is, can this litigation be allowed to go forward without exposing us in return to a lot of litigation from around the world?
On a different matter, Raqqa, the ISIS capital in Syria, the U.S. military spokesman in Baghdad, Colonel Steve Warren, he said today that it looks like ISIS has declared a state of emergency in Raqqa. What can you tell us about that situation?
Well, I think they're very concerned in Raqqa as they see the territory they have around Raqqa shrinking, as they see military maneuvers undertaken by both Kurdish and Arabic forces in the region. They don't know what's coming or when. And, you know, they're under real financial pressure. We have, I think, attacked their oil infrastructure. We have attacked literally their holdings of cash. So they're having some difficulty paying their fighters and paying their employees effectively. So they're under pressure. They're still very lethal, though. We still don't see yet the light at the end of the tunnel. And as we see them, you know, hunkering down in Raqqa, we also see the timeline for the reconquering of Mosul being pushed off by the coalition. So still a lot of hard work ahead.
Yeah, enormous work ahead. Thanks very much, Congressman,
Thanks,
for
Wolf.
coming in. Adam Schiff.